Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, an event in the T.T. Chow Symposium on Innovation series and a collaboration between Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy and the Science History Institute. Today's event is titled Infrastructures for Innovation, Aligning Policy and Practice. I'm Kenny Evans, a scholar with the Science and Technology Policy Program at Rice University's Baker Institute. Thank you so much for joining us today online. It's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Reginald DesRoches. Dr. DesRoches is Rice University's provost and serves as professor of civil and environmental engineering here at Rice. Prior to that, he served as dean of engineering at the George R. Brown School of Engineering, also here at Rice University. He holds a PhD in civil engineering from UC Berkeley and is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. DesRoches, who will give a short introduction and introduce today's panelists.
Great. Thank you, Kenneth. Can you hear me okay? Great. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar organized by the Science and Technology Policy Program at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy and the Science History Institute. Thanks again for joining us online. My name is Reggie DesRoches, and as was mentioned, I'm the provost of Rice University. I'll be hosting today's session entitled Infrastructures for Innovation, Aligning Policy and Practice. Before we start, I'd like to thank the Baker Institute staff and Dave Caruso and the staff of the Science History Institute for their hard work organizing this event. In addition, this event would not have been made possible without the generous support of Benjamin and Winifred Cheng, the Ting Sung and Wei Fong Chow Foundation and the Chow family, and the Kavli Foundation and the National Science Foundation, which are funding the Baker Institute Science and Technology Public Policy Program. Next, I would like to introduce David Cole, President and CEO of the Science History Institute. The Science History Institute's mission is to collect and share stories from innovators and the discoveries that share our lives. They preserve and interpret the history of chemistry, chemical engineering, and the life sciences. Over the past decade, the Science History Institute has been a close collaborator of the Baker Institute Science and Technology Policy Program, not only for the Infrastructures of Innovation series that brings us here today, but also on an oral history project that also funded by the National Science Foundation, which is interviewing members of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology for every past administration since George W. Bush. To tell us a bit more about the Science History Institute is Dr. David Cole. David?
Well, thank you, Dr. DesRoches, and good afternoon, everyone. And let me also add my own welcome to the annual T.T. Chow Symposium on Innovation. The Science History Institute collects and shares the stories of innovators and of discoveries that shape our lives. As the natural repository for the histories of chemistry, chemical engineering, and the life sciences, the Institute's museum and author library make our rapidly expanding collections, archives, and works readily available to the scientifically curious public and to scientists alike. Distillations, our collection of articles, podcasts, and videos, tells compelling stories at the heart of science and society. Our Center for Oral History and our Beckman Center for the History of Chemistry offer exceptional opportunities for academic scholarship. At the Science History Institute, we build and use these collections to engage public and scholarly audiences with the roles that science and technology play in society. We understand scientific exploration is a deeply social enterprise, informed by and shaping history as it pursues its ends. Our goal is to increase public understanding of how scientific breakthroughs shape the world, from the mundane, such as the proliferation of consumer goods, to the life-altering, including manned space travel and genomic medicine. We enable our audiences to expand their perceptions and perspectives and engage in dialogue with us and with each other about how innovation has changed and will continue to change their lives. In short, the Science History Institute exists to expand knowledge and challenge perspectives in the history of science, to reveal how the scientific past is embedded in our daily lives, and to catalyze the reimagining of our scientific and technological future. And I can't think of a better exemplar of this mission than today's symposium. We inaugurated the T.T. Chow Symposium on Innovation in 2009, hosting a spirited discussion on cutting-edge science and science policy in the energy and health sectors. Since then, the symposium has explored topics from the future of food production to changes in our energy culture to breakthroughs in HIV and AIDS research and treatment, always attracting those working at the leading edges of their fields to reveal and to put in context the most innovative and promising avenues of scientific research. In all the topics we've covered, the T.T. Chow Symposium on Innovation has celebrated and encouraged innovation in the greater Houston region. This event brings together established and emerging leaders in the technical, entrepreneurial, healthcare, and policy arenas to think constructively about how Houston's industrial and entrepreneurial heritage can be adapted to address society's needs in the 21st century. Today, we are pleased to present the third in our Infrastructures for Innovation series within the Chow Symposium on Innovation. This series examines and draws attention to the systems needed to support innovation and innovation-based industries, and to the ways in which historical industries continue to shape the future of innovation. I'd like to extend my deep thanks and appreciation to the Chow family for their support of the Science History Institute and of this symposium. And I invite all of you to visit the Institute and to participate in our digital programs at sciencehistory.org. Thank you very much and enjoy.
Great, thank you, David. So for today's panel, we have 4 speakers who will discuss the role of public policy for shaping the development of innovation centers from their diverse perspectives. This is a topic of great relevance for Houston and for Rice specifically, as we lead the development of Rice University's own innovation hub, the ION. The ION will provide a common space for academic researchers, technology startups, and industry partners to support businesses at all stages of the innovation lifecycle, as well as provide career and learning opportunities for students and entrepreneurs from across Houston's many colleges and universities. The ION is currently under construction in Midtown Houston and is expected to open this coming spring. We will start the discussion with each of the invited speakers delivering brief remarks. Afterwards, we will open up the conversation with some questions prepared in advance, as well as from the audience. Please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A during the remarks or afterwards during the Q&A session. Our first speaker is Mr. Dan Berglund, President and CEO of the State Science and Technology Institute in Westerville, Ohio. State Science and Technology Institute is a national nonprofit organization that strengthens development initiatives around science, technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. It conducts research on best practices and trends in technology-based economic development, encourages cooperation amongst and between state and federal programs, and assists states and communities as they develop and implement strategies. Prior to joining the Institute, Mr. Berglund worked as a consultant for the Ohio Department of Development in a variety of positions, including acting deputy director of the Division of Technological Innovation. Mr. Berglund. You're on mute. There you go.
Great. Technology, it's my specialty. Let's move on to the next slide. Reginald, thank you very much for the introduction. You did a great description of SSTI. The only other thing that I would mention about SSTI, in addition to being created in 1996, so we're getting ready to celebrate 25 years of existence, is we have about 150 members located across the country. These are state technology-based economic development organizations, local university and nonprofit organizations. Let's go on to the next slide. So to help frame the discussion for this symposium, I thought it would be helpful to start just by reviewing what we know about the elements that are required for a tech-based economy. And I want to spend just a couple minutes walking through each of these items. So the very first thing that you need is a source of ideas. You need research capacity. And this can be in the form of a research university, federal laboratory, private companies. But you have to have that source of ideas. You also have to be able to get the ideas from the laboratory into the marketplace. So you have to be able to convert ideas into new products, companies, and jobs. And again, this can be in formal technology transfer mechanisms from universities and federal laboratories, or it can be through informal mechanisms, through informal networks from students working in laboratories to taking the knowledge that they've learned and working in the private sector in companies. Which leads to, you need to have a workforce with the appropriate skills in order to have a tech-based economy. You have to have appropriate sources of financing at all stages of development, from basic research through expansion capital for companies. And you need good infrastructure, which obviously means both broadband, but it means the means by which to get from point A to point B. As much as we have all enjoyed during the pandemic spending multiple hours a day sitting in front of our computer screen on Zoom meetings or Zoom symposium, it's still critical that people are going to be able to get from point A to point B. These first 5 elements are all fairly tangible elements that are easy to measure, easier for government to influence through policy and programs. The remaining 2 elements that are required for a tech-based economy are more difficult, both to measure and for government to influence. The first being entrepreneurial culture. What exactly is an entrepreneurial culture? It's very difficult to define. The best description that I heard on this years ago was that if you gather all your friends and family in a room and you announce to them that you've quit your job and you're starting your own company, if they applaud, you're in an entrepreneurial culture. But it's difficult to measure. And then both in terms of entrepreneurial culture and workforce, having a high quality of life that can attract and retain those workers and entrepreneurs that you need is really critical. Let's move on to the next slide. Part of my remarks, I wanted to give just a quick overview of some potential case studies and examples that we've seen across the country over time. And these are in part to illustrate that creating a tech-based economy can occur even in areas that you wouldn't necessarily think about. So the very first example would be in growing your research enterprise. San Diego now is widely accepted as a technology hub, both in biotechnology and information technology. But if you think back 4 decades, 5 decades ago, it was really much more of a sleepy naval-based town. And it was a concerted decision to grow the research enterprise in San Diego that really transformed that city. Great example of university industry research centers is EWI, which used to stand for the Edison Welding Institute, focused on joining technologies. based here in Columbus, Ohio, is a partnership of Ohio State University, originally the Welding Institute based in the UK, and then hundreds of manufacturing companies located throughout North America. And it's a great example of building off of the research expertise at a university at Ohio State, marrying it with the direction from companies identifying specific technology needs that not only they need as individual companies, but also that their broad area of research needed to expand on. The next example that I would give is from Georgia. The Georgia Research Alliance has done work for the last 30 years in building both the research capacity at Georgia's universities through the recruitment of eminent scholars. But as part of the evolution of that organization, they found that as they were building the research capacity of the universities, that they then had the opportunity to bring that university developed technology to the marketplace. And the GRA Ventures is a very clever approach on this, where GRA provides funding to both investigate what research is being done at the universities in partnership with the technology transfer offices, but they're using people that have private sector experience to go into the laboratories to talk with the researchers about what the potential markets are for the research that's being developed, and develop a strategy to bring that to the marketplace and provide proof of concept funding for it. If you want to increase your entrepreneurial capacity and seed capital, and I should mention that increasingly seed capital is being funded by being supplied by angel investors and state and public funded programs. Two great examples of this: the Ben Franklin Technology Partners in Pennsylvania, and then there are a series of entrepreneurial signature projects or venture development organizations in Ohio. One to look at in particular is Rev1 Ventures, again, based here in Columbus. But they work with the entrepreneurial community to build that base, providing mentoring and technical assistance to the entrepreneurs. And then one final case study that I would give is, if you're interested in areas of what some people call traditional industries, I would take a close look at the Water Council in Milwaukee, which was an outgrowth of companies in Milwaukee identifying that they had similar workforce issues and coming together, not as competitors, but as collaborators on what they could do to improve the workforce pipeline for their companies. And it is helping establish Milwaukee as an internationally recognized center for both water industry and water research. Let's go on to the next slide. I would say, and I think Houston has done this from what I can see from the outside, but for consideration, the first step in building a tech-based economy needs to be looking at what strengths does your region currently have? So in each of those elements that I talked about for a tech-based economy, what strengths do you have? What challenges do you have? What gaps exist at the current time? And ultimately, what can be done to change private sector behavior? Because one of our members described this years ago as the field of technology-based economic development is really about trying to create something that is organic, where you're creating an environment where this is going to take on a life of its own and blossom. But sometimes in order for that to happen, you have to change private sector behavior. So you do this through statistical analysis, interviews, roundtables with stakeholders. And let's go on to the next slide. And I guess I want to provide just some cautions or lessons learned as both Houston and other communities pursue this. It's important that you do something because it makes sense for your particular region, the strengths that you have in your region. You know, we see, I've been in the field of technology-based economic development now for 35 years, and we can see ebbs and flows of particular programmatic approaches that occur. People like to both learn from each other, but they'll also copy from each other. So you need to make sure that your programs and policies are based on evidence, that the tools that you are undertaking, that doesn't equal strategy. You need to have a strategy first and then develop the tools that will make sense to implement that strategy. For those of you that are funding these kinds of programs, you need to demand accountability and external evaluation. And for those of you that are running these kinds of programs, you should welcome this. But you also need to build in the resources to do the evaluation. It's oftentimes sexy to want to create something new, to create a new organization, a new entity. And I would just remind people that oftentimes it's better to provide more resources to existing organizations than creating a new organization. We all know that silos exist. And in the economic development field, that means increasingly you've got economic development, you've got technology-based economic development, you have community development, you have workforce development. Those four areas tend to be siloed. And so to the extent that opportunities can be created to break through those silos, that's a positive. I have to say, in looking at ION, one of the things that I was most excited about was it has the potential of really breaking through those four silos. Very important to understand that this is a long-term approach that's going to require sustained investment. And the final point that I would make on cautions and lessons learned is really thinking about how the whole region and all people will benefit. And in closing my remarks, I want to turn to the next slide to give an example that was provided to us from Detroit at SSTI's annual conference, where they talked about Detroit's innovation district. And you can see here on the screen all of the various investments that were being made in this particular innovation district. But the key takeaway, and it has stuck with me, I remember the moment that Leslie Smith made the transition from this slide to let's go to the next slide is this is what the Innovation District covers geographically in Detroit. This is the whole geographic area of Detroit. And so part of the challenge for any community, any region that's looking at building a specific area, a hub, is how exactly do you provide an impact beyond the geographic area that you're specifically focused on. So that's the challenge, but it's also the opportunity. And we can go to my last slide just to provide contact information. And then Reginald, let me turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate the remarks. Our second speaker is Dr. John Hardin, the Executive Director of the North Carolina Board of Science, Technology, and Innovation at the North Carolina Department of Commerce. From 1998 to 2003, Dr. Hardin served as Assistant Vice President for Research and Sponsored Programs at the University of North Carolina System Office. From 1998 to 2005, he also held an adjunct assistant professor position in the Department of Political Science at UNC Chapel Hill. His expertise covers American government, political institutions, and state and political politics. Dr. Hardin holds an MA and PhD degree in political science from UNC Chapel Hill, as well as a BA in economics from Baylor University. Dr. Hardin.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you, Reginald. And as Reginald noted, I did attend Baylor University, and my brother attended medical school at UT Houston. So I've actually, over the years, spent a lot of time in Houston. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person, but I hope my remarks sink in. So I want to tell you mainly about North Carolina here. Dan did a great job of the overall overview. My points are going to reinforce a lot of that, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly just to tee up questions later on. But when I go to conferences, a lot, and I say that I'm from North Carolina, people always say, wow, North Carolina is doing so great in science and technology and innovation. And I would say, yes, that's absolutely true. But if you were to go back 50 years ago, or more than 50 years ago now, 70 years ago, we were not doing very well in science, technology, and innovation. In fact, if you go back to the 1950s, North Carolina had its economy was heavily concentrated in these low-wage primary crop manufacturing industries. They were the backbone of our economy. Things like tobacco and cotton, furniture, textiles, those are what North Carolina was known for. And you can see some of the pictures there. We had Cannon Mills, which was the largest manufacturer of towels in the world, which was great. But you can't build a strong, prosperous economy on those types of industries long term. And those industries, they did not last as long as they could have or should have. And so, as you can see, back in the 1950s, North Carolina actually ranked very low when it came to per capita income. We were 49th out of the 50 states when it came to per capita income. The state was experiencing a lot of brain drain. Despite having a lot of well-educated students, they just could not find suitable jobs in North Carolina. And so economic and political and community leaders saw a need to diversify and expand the economy. Next slide. So what I would call the renaissance of North Carolina's science, technology, and innovation economy really began in the late 1950s. And it's what we are really known for. And that's the Research Triangle Park, or RTP. And RTP is a public-private planned research park created back in 1959. And it was the product of business leaders, academic leaders, and government leaders. And they all played an equal part. People always want to know who played the biggest part. And my answer is they all played equal parts, and they really did. It is the largest research park in the US in terms of number of employees. There's more than 50,000 employees in the park, and in terms of geographic area, and I'll show you that in just a minute. And as you can see, they were pretty innovative even back then. They used a shovel with 3 handles. You don't see those very often. And they also apparently had meetings outside sometimes, but they occasionally went inside as well. And so they were thinking out of the box even back then. And Research Triangle Park is actually run by a foundation. It is a private entity. And that's the mission statement of RTP. It's all about creating a better quality of life through knowledge and technology and the humanities as well. So it's not just high tech, it's also social sciences as well. Next slide. So this is a quick overview of North Carolina, just to put some things in geographic perspective. So you can see the 3 cities in the middle there, Chapel Hill, Durham, and Raleigh, and they are what comprise the Research Triangle. It's right there in the heart of the state. And I'll zoom in the next slide and show you more detail. I'm sorry, we can go back to this slide real fast. And they're relatively close together. So I actually live in Durham, but I work in Raleigh. My drive is less than 25 miles, but I go back and forth between the 2 cities all the time. I also teach in Chapel Hill and go back and forth between Durham and Chapel Hill all the time. And I really travel throughout the entire triangle on a regular basis. But you can see they're all relatively close together. But I've also got another city there in the far left, Winston-Salem, highlighted as well, because I'm going to highlight them in just a minute as well. North Carolina is a relatively large state, not as large as Texas, 10.5 million people. It's the 9th largest state overall, and it's growing rapidly. And one of the reasons it's growing rapidly is because we are strong in science, technology, and innovation, particularly in the Research Triangle region and many of our larger cities. Next slide. So this zooms in a little bit to the Research Triangle region. I want to point you to a few things. First, if you start down at the bottom right, Raleigh is the capital, the state capital, has about 500,000 people in it. It's the home of North Carolina State University, but you can also see there are several other private universities here. And so Raleigh is really a mecca when it comes to higher education. If you move to the left, you can see Chapel Hill. That is the home of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and one of the largest and best public universities in the nation. The same with North Carolina State University. And if you go up to the upper right, in the middle, there is Durham, where I live. That's the home to Duke University. There are not many places in the world, that have that many solid, strong, Research One universities in such a close proximity, as well as other universities, private universities as well. So the total area population for that whole region really is about 2 million. And if you look at the number of higher education students at any given time, it's about 176,000 people. So it's just a wealth of well-educated people there, or people becoming well-educated, and that all leads to what Dan said about having a source of knowledge and ideas. We are a wellspring for that in the Research Triangle region. I'm sorry, one other thing to note there is that you can see the Raleigh-Durham Airport is located right in between the 3 cities, and that kind of purplish area that you see in the middle is literally Research Triangle Park. And so Research Triangle Park is about 8 miles long and 2 miles wide. And it is what I would call a kind of an old school research park. They don't make many parks like this anymore. Most of the innovation hubs now are designed to be much denser, and Research Triangle Park is going that way too. It's relatively spread out. There's a lot of green space, but they are slowly over time developing more pockets of really concentrated area and developing to the new model, the 21st century model, but it's still very prosperous. Next slide. So in addition to the Research Triangle Park starting in 1959, another big development in North Carolina's science, technology, and innovation history is the creation of the Board of Science, Technology, and Innovation. And it was created on the heels of Research Triangle Park. It was created in 1963, so not long after RTP was created. And when it was created, it didn't have innovation in the name. It just was called the Board of Science and Technology. Innovation was added to the name about 5 years ago. It was the first board of its kind, a state-level board, to focus on science, technology, and innovation. It currently has 25 members, and you can see the list of things that it does, but all of these come from the statute that by law that created the board. I think it's best to think of it as a kind of think and do tank for the state of North Carolina for anything you can think of that relates to science, technology, and innovation, and how those intersect with the economy. And so I'm the executive director of that board. We have a staff of 4 or 5 other people, but then we have a 25 board members who are all volunteers that come from the private sector, universities, government, and nonprofits. And they are really the source of a lot of policy and a lot of ideas and programs over the years that have made North Carolina a powerhouse in science, technology, and innovation. Next slide. So due to the founding of RTP in the 1950s and the Board of Science, Technology, and Innovation in the early 1960s, slowly but surely, if you track the data over the years, North Carolina's economic performance, we've gone from 49th in per capita income to much higher. We are well above average. We're still not in the top tier yet, and that's because North Carolina is very much a rural state, but with very strong pockets of innovation, but a lot of the state is still rural. And so when you average it all out together, we rank above average, but still not in the top tier. But if you look at certain areas like the Research Triangle region or other major cities like Charlotte or what's called the Piedmont Triad region, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and High Point, they are all very, very well above average. But you can see that our region and the state in recent years are ranked very highly in national rankings, whether it's Forbes or CNBC, and they have to do with quality of life, economic prowess, best places to live, young workforce, all that sort of thing. And so all of that has come about because of the revolution and the renaissance in North Carolina's science, technology, and innovation over the years. Next slide. So I want to kind of end up, I've got about 5 minutes left, but I want to end up by moving away from the Research Triangle Park and highlighting 3 other innovation hubs in the state of North Carolina. So this is the first hub, and this is the longest hub or the oldest hub above and beyond Research Triangle Park. So this is what's known as Centennial Campus at North Carolina State University. North Carolina State University is a Tier 1 research university. It's a land grant institution, been around a long time, super strong university. But all of these buildings that you see in that picture are relatively new, and they are all part of a satellite campus that is apart from the main campus. So the main campus of NC State University, you can see in the upper left of the picture, those kind of reddish buildings, those are across a major street. That's where the university was traditionally located. Centennial Campus was carved out on an adjacent piece of land that was donated to the state. And that was a key way that public policy played a role in this. Hundreds of acres of land were donated to the state over the years to provide a landing spot, a landing place for Centennial Campus. And as you can see in the upper right, this is very close to downtown Raleigh. It's only 5 miles away from downtown Raleigh. And so it's right there in the heart of the city, but because North Carolina is so wooded, it often feels still like you're in nature. And RTP is the same sort of way. All the buildings that you see on Centennial Campus, the reason they're unique is because they are cohabitated by both academia and industry. And there are special exemptions from a state law known as the Umstead Act, which actually prohibits the state entities from competing with the private sector. But there are exemptions to that act that allow for the universities to house private companies on university property and conduct private business in addition to the state business, even though it's state property. And so that's 2 ways that public policy was involved. Number 1, by carving out exemptions to a state law, named the Umstead Act, but also by granting this land to the university. Next slide, please. This is the same piece of property 30 years ago. And so, yes, you can see there's been a lot of development. This is what the land looked like. It was farmland. And through the development of both state funding, some federal funding, some private funding, and tax bonds as well, they were able to slowly but surely develop the Centennial Campus, and it has become one of the preeminent research and science, technology, and business campuses in the nation, if not the world. So that is Innovation Hub number 1. Let's move to the next slide. This is Innovation Hub number 2. This is relatively new. This also is in the Research Triangle region. This is the Durham Innovation District, or the Durham ID. The building that you see there is brand new. It is in downtown Durham. Had you visited that spot a year ago, it would have been empty. It would have been an empty lot that had nothing on it. And it would have been not run down, but it was not the nicest section of Durham. So Durham, where I live, is undergoing a real renaissance. Next slide, please. So this shows you the master plan for the Durham ID. This is right in the heart of downtown Durham. As you can see, Duke University campus is to the left of that, just to the west, just 2 or 3 miles, very tightly linked with Duke, just like Centennial campus is tightly linked with NC State University. But all that area in yellow was relatively run down within the last 20 or 30 years, because all of this in downtown Durham was built on the back of the tobacco industry. And as you know, the tobacco industry has really died in recent decades. And when I moved to North Carolina, I'm not a native North Carolinian, but when I moved to North Carolina in 1990, I lived in Chapel Hill because I went to UNC. And my wife and I took a little trip over to Durham one day to see what Durham was like. And that was the last trip we took to Durham for several years, because Durham was really run down. And we almost said we'd never come back to Durham. And now we live there, and we've lived there here for 20 years. But there has been a huge renaissance in downtown Durham. Now, when we drive anywhere downtown, there are young people everywhere, apartments everywhere, condos, businesses. It is such a transformation from where it was just 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And a lot of that is due to the Durham Innovation District and to some public policy, again, such as historic preservation tax credits that have allowed builders to develop these areas at a much lower cost than they could otherwise. Next slide. This, again, is going back in time. This is the 1940s of Durham. Almost all of those buildings that you see there were dedicated to tobacco in some form or fashion. Most of those buildings still exist, but they've all been rehabbed and turned into, they've either been rehabbed or some new buildings have been developed to develop the Durham Innovation District. And so this is a real transformation for the city of Durham. Just a couple more slides. Next slide. So this is Winston-Salem, that city I showed you earlier that's in more of the western part of the state. This also, Winston-Salem, is also historically a tobacco town. Salem, Salem cigarettes, Winston cigarettes. That's, it grew up around, based on tobacco, textiles, and furniture. Winston-Salem did. This is a shot from their new innovation quarter, which is right downtown. Next slide, please. So you can see that this is kind of along the lines of Centennial Campus. It's located in downtown Winston-Salem, which you can see right there in the kind of upper right part of the picture. But this really builds on the strengths of Winston-Salem, and that's where Wake Forest University is. Wake Forest is somewhat similar to Rice University in size and quality. And so a lot of this that's in the downtown innovation quarter in Winston-Salem is built upon Wake Forest's strengths. They're very strong in medicine, very strong in biotechnology, but there are a lot of other universities and higher education institutions in the area as well. Down at the bottom, you can see Winston-Salem State University, which is part of the UNC system. On the far left, there's Forsyth Tech Community College. There's also the UNC School of the Arts, which is also part of the UNC system. Salem College, which is a private university. Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center, which is a major hospital in the western part of the state. So just like Durham is having a renaissance, Winston-Salem is having very much a similar renaissance. Much of its downtown was populated with Reynolds tobacco buildings. Now they are being renovated and turned into an innovation district. Next slide, please. This is what Winston-Salem looked like in the 1950s. Smokestacks, tobacco, railroads, and the buildings that you see the arrow to, many of those have also been rehabbed and turned into innovation, into their innovation corridor. And so final slide, and then I'll wrap it up. So these are the lessons learned, and a lot of these are common sense, but they're worth repeating. Number one, like Dan said, you got to know your uniquely valuable assets. Everybody has assets, but you want to make sure that yours are uniquely valuable and things that give you a competitive advantage. Proximity and location matter. The fact that for Research Triangle Park that we had those major universities together, an airport, big cities, they all came together and made that a natural to start Research Triangle Park. But it couldn't have happened without committed leaders from all the different sectors. It was actually, even though we had a lot of the assets, it was a big risk to start Research Triangle Park because that land was actually farmland where they started Research Triangle Park, and it was not guaranteed that they would succeed. You have to be persistent, obviously. Research Triangle Park was not an overnight success. People often say it was a 20 or 30 year overnight success because it took a long time to really get rolling. There was a lot of controversy and pushback. People, in fact, I gave a similar talk to a ladies group here in Durham that's been around for more than 100 years. And many of these women were around when Research Triangle Park was started. And they all said that they thought it was a crazy idea because they said, why would anyone want to put a research park right in the middle of a field between three big cities? And so a lot of people did push back. But if people focus on the common good and you have these bridging institutions that bridge academia and industry, engage all the stakeholders early and often and on a repeated basis, and have supportive policies like these tax credits that played a huge role in developing the innovation corridor, the innovation district. There were land grants for Centennial Campus, and there are these university industry collaborative agreements. Those things have really enabled the pieces to come together and be catalyzed in a way that they probably could not have otherwise. And then finally, have patience. Economic development, like Dan said, is a long game. You will have short-term wins, but the game is really won over the long term. You have to be persistent and keep working for the common good. That's it. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you, John. I think you're right about the fact that few places have the concentration of top R1 universities as a Research Triangle Park with the three great universities there. Certainly an incredible success story. Next, we have our very own Mr. William Fulton, Bill Fulton, who is the director of the Kinder Institute for Urban Research at Rice University. Mr. Fulton is a former mayor of Ventura, California, and director of planning and economic development for the city of San Diego. He is also the author of 6 books, including Guide to California Planning, the standard urban planning textbook in California. He currently serves as a board chair for Metro Lab Network, a national network of research partnerships between cities and universities, and vice chair of Link Houston, a transportation equity advocacy group. Mr. Fulton holds master's degrees in mass communication from American University and urban planning from the University of California, LA. Bill.
Thank you, Reggie, and hello, everybody. I wanted to talk. I want to take this down to the ground level here in Houston a little bit, and talk about how you. I'm by background. I'm an urban planner, and I have a background in economic development and local government. So I want to talk about how all those things work together and how they could work together to make this fledgling innovation district work here in Houston. Go on to the next slide. So what makes a successful innovation district? We've already heard a lot of these ideas from Dan and John. I want to summarize and crystallize them for you. I think it boils down to 4 things. Next slide, please. Number 1, you have to have a collaborative environment. We've seen that over and over again, that people have to be able to have the ability to work together in creative ways, almost sometimes accidental ways to get things done. Go ahead to the next slide. Number 2, you have to have a rapid product development cycle where things move rapidly from research all the way through to commercialization. Next slide, please. Generally speaking, and this is Kendall Square in Cambridge, one of the most successful innovation districts in the country, a dense, misused urban setting generally is a better place for all this collision and all these ideas to go together and at the same time. John mentioned the transition at Research Triangle Park from these freestanding, isolated proprietary industry research institutes to creating settings like this, and contrasted, for example, what you see in Durham compared to what you see in traditional Research Triangle Park. I think that's very important. And the fourth thing, if you can go to the next slide, is as both previous speakers said, strong connections to the local economy. If you don't have those four things, you're not going to have a successful innovation district as we are trying to create here in Houston. Okay, so how are we doing? What do we have here in Houston today? Go on to the next slide. And this is a list that you can release these one at a time. First of all, energy innovation. Energy is our biggest business. Energy innovation historically, although this is changing somewhat, has typically occurred in a proprietary environment, not a collaborative environment. Secondly, medical innovation spinoff has underperformed. We have, everybody in the world knows we have the biggest medical center in the world, and we have an unbelievable medical research infrastructure at the Med Center and at Rice. Historically, although this is beginning to change, the spin-off aspect of the commercialization aspect of that has underperformed. Okay, number three, tech innovation is still nascent. Houston is not traditionally a tech center. This is growing. The ION is going to help stimulate that, but that is still nascent. Number four, a big problem for many places, but especially for Houston, venture capital has gravitated to Austin in Texas, not to Houston. It's beginning to come here. We have a lot of money locally. It's beginning to happen, but we still have a ways to go on that. And the last item, number five, these dense, walkable, face-to-face characteristics of innovation districts, we haven't seen them in Houston. When you think about dense, walkable urban settings, you don't think of Houston, do you? Houston, you think of sprawl, and you think of a big, blobby, sprawling metropolitan area. There's two sides to that in Houston, as I'll get to in a minute. So on to the next slide. How we still have a problem in Houston. We're beginning to address it. What does Houston innovation look like? Well, I think it consists basically of three things, and I'm going to draw on my own research and background from other places in talking about three things. Number one, and I'm going to try to talk about the policy implications of these as well. As everyone knows, as everyone on this call knows, you've got to pop open proprietary research so that you get collaborative research. Now, so for example, I grew up in upstate New York near Cornell. My grandfather was a chemist at Cornell. He got lured out of Cornell to start and run a proprietary research lab at a manufacturing company in upstate New York, which he did for 30 years. Now today he'd stay at Cornell, right? He'd stay at Cornell, he'd collaborate with a lot of other people, and the company he went to work for would benefit from this, but so would many other people. I'll give you another example. When I was the mayor of Ventura, the largest company in our county was Amgen. Amgen was completely proprietary research until one day when the FDA killed their most important emerging drug, and they had to lay off all of their engineers. Well, all of a sudden, all of their biotech engineers were living at home, starting their own labs, and Amgen thought, hey, we might as well take advantage of this, and they began to outsource a lot of their research ideas. And we over in Ventura nearby said, hey, maybe we can grab some of this. So we did a variety of things that were pretty daring at the time. The city created an investment fund where we invested in venture capital to try to bring it to Ventura. What can public policy do to pop open proprietary research at the local level? It's not immediately obvious, but one is you can either invest your own public money or private money to try to drive research, to drive private capital toward you. We got CalPERS and Oregon PERS investing in companies in Ventura when we did that. Obviously, broadband, and as everybody has said, sort of place and space is incredibly important. And another thing that Reggie and I talk about a lot, both about the Rice campus in Houston, is local cities can provide great test beds for technological innovation. You generate a technological innovation, you need to test it out. There's a local market, there's a local place. Reggie and I often talk about the campus at Rice as being one of those possibilities. So that's number one, and there's a lot of policy implications to that. Number two, in Houston, this is very in Houston-like, I think we have to figure out how to embrace Houston sprawl. This sounds like the opposite of what I just said, right? But hang on with me on this. Houston, I'm going to get to the Midtown Innovation District in a minute and how important it is to have a dense urban setting there. But Houston is a sprawling place. And in fact, our innovation economy is sprawling all over the place. The Ion, which is on the bottom there, is in the middle of the map here. The Cannon, which is another accelerator, is so far on the left of the map. I don't think it's even on the map. It's over by Beltway 8. And so unlike, say, Torrey Pines, unlike Boston, unlike Mission Bay, we are never, unlike Kendall Square, we are, even compared to Research Triangle, we are never going to have everything we need in one place. So I think we need to embrace the fact that we're going to have a multipolar, or what an urban planner would call a polynuclear innovation economy. And that parts of it are going to be all over the place, particularly since the energy companies have dispersed from downtown and they are all over their headquarters are all over the region as well. Now, does that mean we don't need dense urban places where people bump into each other? No, we do need that. And if you go on to the next slide, the second to the last slide, we still in Houston need these real mixed use districts. These are both pictures from Midtown Houston near the Ion. It's coming along. It's still not the kind of place where, say, you don't need a car, where you bump into everybody all the time. Even though we have a polynuclear or scattered innovation economy, we still need a place for all those people to come together, either on a daily basis or on a periodic basis, because this is where the face-to-face interaction is going to occur. So what we have to do in Houston is build a place where face-to-face interaction is comfortable and it's common. And I would also say another reason why this is important for Houston and why we have a lot of work to do on this is that historically Houston was a place where you came to make money, right? Particularly in the energy industry. And and so it didn't really matter what the quality of life was like. You could come here and make some money and you'd be fine. And if you were a petroleum engineer in particular, where else in the world were you going to go, right? Well, now that the energy industry has become so technologically driven, what are the energy companies doing? They're competing for talent with Silicon Valley. They're competing for talent with Microsoft and Amazon in Seattle. So Houston has to up its game. The energy companies know this. The philanthropists such as Rich and Nancy Kinder, Rich Kinder from Kinder Morgan know this, and that's why they're investing in quality of life here. So number one, policy implications, policy approaches to popping open proprietary research. Number two, understanding the urban morphology of the region and how to take advantage of this dispersed innovation economy. And number three, building a core, a dense walkable core, so that when people do need to come together here in Houston to build the innovation economy, they can do it in Midtown and around the Ion. Go ahead to the next slide. So that's pretty much what I think is the formula for Houston's Innovation District. And I look forward to having a conversation about that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Bill. Very interesting. I look forward to the Q&A and probing some of the concepts you mentioned earlier. All right, so next we have Dr. Julia Wertnick, the Research and Development Director for the Packaging and Specialty Plastics area at Dow. Dr. Wertnick was responsible for the research and development integration activities related to the Dow-DuPont merger. Previously, as Dow's R&D strategy leader, she coordinated the planning and implementation of strategic initiatives, technical communications, and the management of global R&D portfolio research. She joined Dow in 2010, leading product development groups across the advanced semiconductor packaging portfolio and serving as the site implementation leader for Dow's Women's Innovation Network. Dr. Wertnick holds a PhD in chemistry from Stanford University and a BS in chemistry from Caltech. Dr. Wortnick, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
You got it. You did it very well. So well done. And I am thrilled to be here and to be speaking on behalf of Dow, representing innovation company in the region. We are very, very interested in this topic of policy, and I appreciate the chance to join these panelists. You're going to see, from me, a lot of agreement with what you've heard from some of the other panelists as we look to implementation of some of the initiatives that they've been mentioning. I will be making verbal remarks for those of you also tuning in, so you're not missing any slides from me. So let me just start with Dow. We are obviously a very large materials company in the world. To give you a sense of the scale of our company, about $40 billion or so of sales every year, 36 or so thousand employees worldwide, over 100 manufacturing sites across 30 different countries. As mentioned in my career within Dow, within R&D, it's taken me to multiple sites, right? I, of course, grew up in California, actually close to Ventura, so I have some connections there. Did my work through PhD in California, and of course in Silicon Valley for my PhD. Been part of Dow in Massachusetts, outside Boston, another great innovation hub there, fueled by the universities. And I've also been in the Midland hub within R&D. Our headquarters is a center for us for innovation. Currently located within Texas, where we have a significant investment in our manufacturing footprint, as well as our technology footprint, and really generating billions of pounds of materials every day here on the Gulf Coast. So a few things I want to start with. For us, as we look at it from a Dow innovation perspective, policy is very critical. It's very central. And ultimately, we see it as really setting the ground rules and the vision. That's going to dictate what we're going to do in the country and in the region. And in Dow, and in my experience, I've had a lot of opportunity to really think about innovation investments, where we want to be building our technology hubs, where we want to be investing. We are tackling some of the more challenging problems of the future. You said it well earlier about the energy sector evolving into these very disruptive, more open type innovations. It's very true for the materials sector as well, as we tackle these big challenges on sustainability, on carbon, recyclability, right? These are big challenging problems, and we absolutely compete, right, for the top talent to solve those. So that was really well said. Ultimately, from the corporate perspective, from the innovation perspective, see policy ultimately providing us that environment to allow innovation and ultimately invention to go to practice. Really, that is the game. That's how we think about policy. As we consider different potential options for our investment, policy is a central theme. Dow's ambition, and something you're going to see from a lot of big materials and energy companies as we move forward, is to be the world's most innovative and customer-centric, as well as inclusive and sustainable material company in the world. I bring that up because you can see these big ambitious goals, large global footprints, and it pivots for me into the first of three topics I want to cover, and how policy connects to innovation, and ultimately what it means for the region. First off, I'd like to just talk about the connection between innovation as well as manufacturing footprint. This was covered by some of the other panelists also, in terms of understanding for a region what are the fundamental strengths, looking at the economy, looking at the technology, what are the strengths of the regions. And for the materials sector, and we look at now Texas, and we look at the Houston area, clearly the connection between innovation and manufacturing is extremely strong. So as the region is promoting more innovative manufacturing investment, so too come R&D and innovation investment. They're very tied together. Many factors here, right, in terms of policy can affect where companies decide to build manufacturing footprint, and really next generation manufacturing footprint, which is what attracts the innovation related to that. You have everything there from things like permitting. We talked before about tax credits and savings there. Policy becomes very critical, right? Clear, understandable policies in regions heavily influence decision-making. And of course, regulations, right, that are science-based are always going to be attracting companies that want to be creating the manufacturing of the future. So that creates a gravitational well in terms of manufacturing that then pulls technology forward. Another category I want to cover is also relating to, you think about technology space, you think about incubators and investing in either government or university research. Of course, I come from the industrial sector, right? The private sector of materials research. We have a very strong vested interest in the innovation coming from universities and coming from startups and coming from government-funded labs. A lot of this gets down to the fact that the work that is happening in the public sector as well as in startups, from where I sit and where we sit, is most beneficial when it is focused on that truly disruptive basic research, right? Research that can fuel either multiple industries or multiple companies. That's when you get more open research. That's when you can make true breakthroughs, and you can then rely on the larger, commercial-minded manufacturing companies, if you have tight partnerships, to take those ideas, partner together, and bring them to scale. We've seen many models like this across all the industries, right? Pharma, materials, energy, right? You're going to see it more and more as we tackle bigger problems. And it's a real opportunity for this location. You think about Houston, because you have many companies with a lot of technical strength to partner with strong mutual interest in things like disruptive breakthrough energy. Right? This region has incredible wind power access that attracts manufacturing companies. Green energy is a big attractor for us. But you have opportunity to grow and disrupt in terms of energy research beyond that, for example. Carbon sequestration. Right? There's many areas that are significant breakthroughs are necessary and are going to touch and multiple sectors in industry. So what the focus is very important. But I think a key point there is that changing direction is really the death blow to these things, right? We often will see technology hubs or centers focused on an area, and then a few years later, some public interest changes and people change direction. True fundamental breakthrough research requires focus, requires time. It's one of the things that's very critical. So ultimately, an identity for a research strategy for a hub and a commitment to investment and long-term focus will allow you to attract the right talent and do the right research. Again, these things are not the order of months, right? This is years of dedicated investment, and it's why it works, right? You can't just be changing directions all the time. And in that, I would say, playing to your strengths as to what is strong about this region. And I mentioned from where I see some real natural strengths you have already in terms of manufacturing, due to, of course, excellent feedstock positions, as well as many other factors and leadership and energy, which allows us, this region, to potentially lead the way in these very important technology areas. So the third topic I want to cover, and the final one was covered before too, but is really the critical piece. You think about what's the most important thing in innovation. And for me, I've been in R&D my whole career. My job now, very much driving technology portfolios across many different areas. The most important thing anyone does in innovation is finds the right people. Innovation is entirely about the people. It is entirely about the talent. Everything else is necessary, but without the right people, nothing will get done. So a critical piece and the most important thing is ultimately creating an environment where you can access the right talent. And I talked about the incumbency of some of these sectors that are here, right? You sit on a region that has thousands of incredible engineers, chemists, right? Really driven to push the boundaries of material science. Ultimately, you have universities that are also focusing that way, right? That's a critical need as well. For talent, right? At the end of the day, a couple different categories for innovation that we'd be looking for and that you'd see in a tech hub. You've got your, professionals, let's say, right? PhDs, we hire many of those, engineers, chemists. That talent pool is international. It's from everywhere. And so creating an environment where we're going to be able to, and it was mentioned before, right? Not only attract talent from all over the place, the top universities in the country and the world, but then have an environment where people want to live. They want to raise a family, right? The international nature and move of Houston has actually been very attractive as we've tried to recruit talent to this area. People expect that, right? They've lived in different places. They want to have that access. And if you're looking to hire the best talent in innovation, you got to look all over the place. And you got to look with an eye also towards diversity in background as well as experience. And so you need a place, right, to attract that talent. So the brand of Houston, right, the brand of the area is very critical for professionals. But I also don't want to forget another critical source of talent, which is also locally developed talent. Right, Dow is a huge play in STEM. You see that from my peers and our competitors too. many, many reasons for that, right? We strongly believe in it, right? Of course, our employees want excellent schools, right, for their children, but also we need, and all innovation will thrive in this region if you truly have strong, K through 20, right? The early stage STEM education. So that ultimately everything, not just creating the best PhDs locally, because as I said, we can get those from all over the place. Research universities, very critical, but they tend to have a lot of good collaboration. But we also need strong engineering talent, strong scientific talent from our community colleges, from our trade schools, right? Ultimately, an innovation culture is beyond just a few PhDs. It gets down to the grade school, the kindergarten, right? So we really have to take a concerted approach. And again, I would say if we focus in on the types of skills we're looking for, the kinds of backgrounds, and then partner together, right? Industry, academia, as well as governments to forge a strategy that can work for the region. I'm confident that we can continue to grow, to invest, and to really push that forward. So I'm very happy to take any questions across all of those topics. As mentioned, I've seen innovation decisions, investment decisions made in many different places. I've led teams globally across this country, as well as in Europe and in Asia, and have a good sense of the kinds of things that motivate investment from a corporate side, and also the types of things communities and policies can do to really create that excitement and that hub in the region. So again, thank you for the opportunity to participate, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Great. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that. I do have a question, but I may just sneak it in as one of the early questions in the Q&A. First of all, I want to thank all the panelists for the really great remarks and over a broad range of topics, but really quite interesting. Now I'd like to open it up for conversations. So members of the audience, if you have questions you'd like to ask the speaker or the panel, particular speaker or the panel in general, you can do so using the Q&A feature on Zoom in the window. We will get to you as many questions as possible. I do have a couple of questions while people are giving thought to their questions. Just real quick, Julia, since you're there on my screen anyway, I loved your talk about materials. Rice is an area that has significant strength in materials. We just got a major gift to create the Welch Institute in Advanced Materials, $100 million gift, and we hope that in 5 to 7 years, this will be the top materials institute, not just in Texas, but in the world. How do you accelerate, and this is obviously focused on basic research because it's the Welch Institute, but also wants to see the translational aspect. How do you accelerate? What models do you see that work well for accelerating going from basic research in the university to making its way to the marketplace and to impacting people's lives?
It's a great question. Many thoughts on that. As you can imagine, we spend significant time and a significant portion of our research investment in strategic programs with universities. And we've seen lots of failure most of this, and also lots of things that have worked well. So first of all, obviously, see the smile on my face, talk about building material strength in this region, right? I think that is a fantastic direction. And often we miss on some of those fundamental breakthroughs that are still necessary in materials, right? To get us through to this future. Again, very challenging problems to address. So I do think choosing the right area that's going to be attractive also to local companies is important, because my answer is going to be very much about the partnership. So the involvement early on. I think sometimes people might assume that a big company like a Dow, might just want to take technology and eventually just take it for ourselves and commercialize it. In reality, as I mentioned, we harnessed and we hire the best researchers in the world intentionally. And we have many of our researchers are partnering with universities on early stage projects. It's an expectation for our researchers also to nurture that. And so what I would say is the partnership, even on early stage research, because at the end of the day, ensuring that early stage research, when you make that breakthrough, is going to be a breakthrough for humanity, right? That is the purpose. And honestly, we're going to know that together. We're going to see what the biggest challenges are fundamentally that stop us from that new breakthrough material. And if we're working together, we're going to be communicating that. Because again, that's not really proprietary. That's of interest to our whole industry, right? So we're going to take it back to a point of that. So the partnership is critical. I'd say one failure mode we've seen sometimes is that you end up with large research hubs and then people kind of spin off small companies from that. Little startups happen there. In materials sector, that's usually a negative thing, because you need the scale, you need the applicability, you need to know how to go big and how to implement, right? How to build manufacturing. And so sometimes we see a bit of a failure mode there. You end up in kind of an IP problem versus just making a breakthrough and then making it happen, right? So that would be what how we've seen it work well in the past.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Appreciate that. All right. So we'll get to some of the questions. We already have several that have been put in the Q&A. This is, I think, general for the panelists. With the pandemic, how does the concept of density, face-to-face interactions translate when more and more technology companies are working remotely?
Reggie, if I could take that on, Reggie, I think what's happening is something a little more subtle than just people are working remotely. Sometimes what the world that I see emerging post-pandemic is, I call it the urban hotel and the suburban workshop. So people will work at home or close to home far more than they used to if they don't have to work in a lab. But that doesn't obviate the need for face-to-face contact. So urban locations, dense locations, job centers, places like the ION Midtown become the place where that necessary face-to-face action takes place. And this is where I said you have to embrace sprawl in a certain way, because in Houston, people are all over the place. They can't get to each other all the time, but they can get to each other some of the time. If you are, to Julia's point about needing, about community colleges and so forth being part of this ecosystem, if you're a kid in spring and you're going to a community college to learn some technical skill that's necessary in the innovation economy, you shouldn't have to go to the ION in Midtown every day. But you do need to be connected to that world in a variety of ways. You probably need to go once in a while. So I think those face-to-face places are going to be more important than ever, but for more specialized interaction than they used to be. And people will do more of their work at home or in their neighborhood than they used to.
Yep. Great. Anybody else want to take that on? Or I'll go to the next question if not.
I would just second exactly what Bill is saying. I think the pandemic may have provided an even better reason for innovation districts to exist, because the collaboration and the informal interaction that you hope for out of an innovation district is going to have to be more intentional. You know, where my office is located in a traditional suburban office park, all of those landlords are terrified what's going to happen with their business because we don't need to be in those offices. What we do need for my organization and most of those organizations in that suburban office park are going to be smaller scale settings where we have the opportunity to interact with our peers. So I actually think the pandemic is good for innovation districts, and I think it's good potentially for rural areas as well, where people might want to be able to live and continue working from home.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'll get to a different question. What's the best approach to encouraging collaborative work across the Innovation Hub while balancing the urgent need for intellectual property protection formally and preservation of trade secrets? What do other regions do to encourage collaboration?
So this is John. I'll take a stab at that. So my best experience is within the region that I live in, the Research Triangle region. And I would say there is a lot of collaboration across the universities. The universities are kind of the wellspring for a lot of the ideas. We also have a very strong private sector, but it's taken years for that to develop. People often think that the universities compete because we compete on the playing field of basketball and football, especially basketball, but and we do, but people are surprised when we show the numbers of how many collaborative relationships there are and the dollars associated with those collaborative relationships. And much of that happens simply because of proximity and because of the ecosystem where people just have these natural, serendipitous interactions. And often when funding opportunities come about, people find each other very quickly. There's no lack of coffee shops in the area. I have about 20 different ones that I go to all throughout the triangle, and about half the people there are researchers or company people collaborating. And finally, so a lot of it happens naturally, but the other thing I would say is there are a lot of organizations, both university-based and company-based and nonprofit-based, that actively create networking events. And those really help out a lot. One of those in North Carolina is called the Council for Entrepreneurial Development, or CED. And it has done such a great job of pulling people together that might meet each other on their own, but they really do it much more quickly and effectively through organizations like that.
Great, thank you.
And one other thing, with respect to the legal aspect, our ecosystem is not lacking when it comes to attorneys. And so that's a part of a healthy ecosystem. You've got the researchers, the business people, but you've also got the legal community to balance all that out and make sure that IP protections are there. And so I feel like we're strong on that.
Great.
Maybe I'll chip in on the IP side, because this is a critical point. And often when we get ourselves, all tied up when we talk about the IP part. So we've had multiple experiences there, and we actually started, and now I've seen many of the companies go this same way, a program to try to streamline this with universities. And I think with innovation hubs, it's a little bit behind that, but it's the same opportunity that exists. Streamline it, meaning we start, for example, with our strategic research universities with master research agreements that just hammers it all out, right? Just hashes out what's going to be in terms of the relationship, IP, publication. Everyone just agrees to all of that, and it's big and blanketed. So now you can just go, right? You don't have to every little thing go and negotiate for a legal agreement. You want things to be simple and easy. You do need the lawyers, everyone to do it. But I would say if you can just define clear rules, with your partners, then no one on the research side should be thinking about that. They should just be researching within that boundary, right? So you can really make things simple for people if you do the action ahead of time.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
And I would just add too, if I can, this is, I think, one of the things that EWI that I mentioned in my comments has figured out in terms of bringing the DAOs of the world with USX together. It's thinking about those companies defining what's the core generic research area that we can all agree we need this, as Julia described it before, some fundamental breakthrough research. Take the research to that level, and then we'll all go and pursue it on our own. So there are ways of dealing with the IP protection that still deals with collaboration. Julia, you probably know this 10 times more than I do, but I just wanted to jump in to make that point.
Great, thanks, Dan. This one's probably for John and Bill. How are you incorporating climate change projections into the investments and policy recommendations you might be making in your areas? I guess that'd be Houston and North Carolina.
So in North Carolina, our governor, Roy Cooper, in 2018 created an executive order addressing climate change and clean energy. And he basically mobilized all the state agencies to factor in climate change issues into their plans. And we're in the process of doing that right now. We've done a comprehensive climate assessment and resilience analysis for North Carolina. We personally in the Department of Commerce have done a lot of economic analyses focused on clean energy industries to see what the job needs are and whether we have the training to meet those needs. And finally, my office is heavily focused on offshore wind now, which 2 years ago, I knew nothing about offshore wind. And now probably 30% of my time is focused on that. That's a real economic opportunity for North Carolina. It is an energy opportunity as well as an environmental opportunity. And if you take the same sort of activity and multiply that across all the different executive branch agencies, while I would say it's not deep necessarily, it is very broad, and it's becoming deeper as time goes on, as we are compelled to look at this. And so that's my short answer.
Okay. Bill, did you want to?
I would say two things. Number one, especially since Hurricane Harvey in 2017, the concern about climate change driven extreme weather events is really an existential threat for Houston, its quality of life and its economy. And so since then, the city has generated both a resiliency plan and a climate action plan. And the goal there is obviously to mitigate climate change, but also allow all of the neighborhoods in the city, including the Midtown Innovation District, to become more resilient and withstand some of these extreme weather events, particularly flooding here in Houston. But I also think there's an opportunity that the energy industry sees to work on some of the low carbon approaches to this, which is the perfect opportunity for me to suggest to Reggie that he talk about the Rice's Carbon Hub.
I'll do that if I have a minute, Bill.
Okay.
Some of these questions, but great.
All right.
And this is for each of the panelists. What is the number one suggestion you would have for the Rice Ion success, to ensure success in the Rice Ion, and how might you measure success? And I'll let you jump in whatever order you might find most appropriate.
Well, Reggie, go ahead. Go ahead. No, I was going to say, Reggie, I would say it's don't just fill the thing up, curate what goes on in there very carefully so you get maximum value out of it. Rice has put $100 million into that thing. There's going to be a pressure to get a return on the investment, but the return on the investment has to be long-term and careful.
So my answer will be an obvious answer, but it needs to be said, and that is the right leadership. And for every instance that I cited in my presentation, I can point to 2 or 3 key people that I think those hubs would not have developed without those people. And the timing was good. We had a lot of the raw materials, but there were some people who were really the catalysts who then were able to have the trust of the community and bring it to fruition.
I'm going to go with the strong industry partnerships part, right? I think you measure the success ultimately by is the innovation being delivered, truly impacting the world in a positive way. The ROI gets down to implementation. So are those ideas being taken forward? If the Institute simply, writes incredible research papers that aren't brought forward into the future, then I don't know if I would call it overly successful. So I think ensuring that the strategy of that center is pointed to the most important fundamental breakthroughs. And again, you're going to get that from those industrial partnerships with the research companies that you have surrounding the area.
And I'm going to cheat and give 2, and also say that I agree with everything that Bill, John, and Julia said. But in terms of success, I think it has to be clear in communicating what its goals and what its vision are. That if you're going to have long-term commitment to the effort, then it's got to be clear what the effort is and what it's actually attempting to accomplish. And then the other quick one that I would give is, again, I think it's vitally important that it be connected to all of Houston and not just a small geographic land area in Houston.
Great. So as Bill mentioned, we have this project here at Rice called the Carbon Hub. It's a collaboration between our faculty and various universities. And the basic idea is to take traditional hydrocarbons and create hydrogen energy and carbon materials that actually can be used for a variety of applications, including using them in buildings and other infrastructure, cars and so forth. So it's a really ambitious, bold project funded right now by a number of oil and gas companies and manufacturers, and it's really exciting to see this thing take off and the impact that it can have both nationally and globally. All right, a few other questions came in. This one looks like it might be for Bill, but I guess anybody can answer. Ask the majority of Houstonians, and they would be unaware of any zones in Houston, any incubator or innovation zones. What are the chances of land grants and tax incentives to specifically target a defined research and innovation district?
Well, a majority of Houstonians may be unaware of any zones, but investors, and especially real estate investors, are very aware of zones. They're very aware of geography, and they're very aware of tax incentives. So, for example, one of the things that the mayor of Houston and the governor of Texas made sure of was that the ION was in the federal opportunity zone, right? Which is basically a tax incentive related to capital gains. To try to get unrealized capital gains off the sidelines and invested in underserved neighborhoods. So I'm not especially concerned about that. I do think that there are, one of the things that I think any jurisdiction has to do, Houston, I think, needs to do some work on this, is make sure that all of their different tax incentives align around the same thing, right? Sometimes in Texas, we have a tendency to throw tax incentives at one-off deals rather than trying to figure out how to combine them all, state and federal, so that they maximize the power of getting those facilities into the particular locations where they need to go.
Great. All right, slightly different question. What responsibility do private entities have towards the communities they get involved with? Is there a way to encourage businesses to get involved with social justice issues, affordable housing, infill development, accessibility to public transport, carbon neutral development, et cetera, besides the goal of boosting technical innovation?
I'm going to start with this one because I'd say a strong responsibility, or I guess as I would say, successful companies of the future will have a strong responsibility towards it, right? We strongly believe in that. And so then, free market, we'll have people with different kinds of models, but from a DAO perspective, the safety of our workers and the commitment to the community is one of our absolute core values. And I can tell you, it's been a very successful way for us to secure some of this incredible talent that wants to stay with us. Again, in the war for talent, people do want to join companies that are here to truly make things better for the community and for the world. Very few people nowadays just join companies, to make some sort of profit, right? The best scientists in the world have entered this field because they want to make a change. So at the end of the day, smart companies, this is their core, right? And so, for example, for us, right, we have, big public statements. We have the DAO Acts, right, where we're making big commitments in terms of social justice. We have significant philanthropy now with, the pandemic hit. And Dow just started making things we never made before. And we started making hand sanitizer. We started volunteering and just giving away materials for medical that we would normally not do. Not at all because it's profitable to us, because it's not, but because it's the right thing to do for our communities. And we're all made of people, right? So it's a critical question. I hope it was a part of all company strategy in the past, but it is absolutely the winning strategy for innovation companies of the future. So I do think we need to continue to expect that. And again, in the natural order of things, the stronger companies will win, and those are the ones with the best talent, the most engaged talent. So it's a critical question, and it's a motivation for the future. And pivoting also towards this discussion, it's also a way to build that engagement and excitement as a beacon, right, for talent of this new innovation hub, of sending that message of what are the technical focus areas, but connecting that to what does it mean in terms of impact, right? People are motivated by the great scientific breakthroughs and the fundamental material science. But this is also where the partnerships with industry can help. Let us then translate that into what are these big, hairy goals, right, that we're taking on through these fundamentals. You'll be able to therefore attract the best talent. And we can take them away from the tech companies, take them from Silicon Valley, right? And they will come to solve these big, important problems. And the hub is made of the people, right? So I think those are things we need to always keep in mind. And those are the motivations we're seeing now of the workforce, which we're very excited to see, because it's a good step forward for the world.
I think, Reggie, that's where this workforce development sort of pyramid comes into play. In many of these neighborhoods that are being renovated, or near many of these neighborhoods that are being renovated by innovation districts, there are people who have a tough time getting a good education, a tough time getting a good job. And as Julie said, there are a lot of technical jobs that are necessary in all of these innovation industries. That do not require PhDs. Sometimes they just require AAs or a certificate from a community college. And if you can connect those people to the innovation economy,
through workforce development, I think that's a win-win for the innovation district and the institutions there and for the people who live nearby.
All right. What are the biggest threats to Houston rising as a material science or energy 2.0 technology center of gravity for the hemisphere? So what are the biggest threats to that happening? I mean, we're all excited about the Welch Institute. We're excited about the ION and part of the focus on materials. What are the biggest threats to this actually becoming what we all want it to become in terms of the center of materials and energy innovation?
Well, I think the biggest threat in Houston is that Houston will think of itself as the oil and gas capital of the world and not the energy capital of the world, right? That Houston will wind up like Detroit, being outstripped not so much by, say, Japan, but outstripped by Silicon Valley, right? That the future of energy will be in technology. The way to Silicon Valley might outstrip Detroit on autonomous vehicles. Silicon Valley or other technologically based economies might outstrip Houston in advanced and alternative energy. And I think that's, people in Houston are very aware of that now. One of the leading investment bankers, energy investment bankers in Houston recently made a speech where he made that very clear. And I think everybody is very aware. We don't want to be the next Detroit. We want to be not just this Houston, but the next one.
I would second
Well
that
said. Please go ahead.
by just saying that it would be probably lack of clear goals or agreement on goals, which is just another way of stating, I think, what Bill said.
Maybe to add to that identity of the area, I think it's exactly right. When you talk about the future of energy, if we're just thinking, oil and gas, I mean, that is one component, right? But really, at the end of the day, those industries will move towards materials as we go to green energy. You attract also those again, you attract them by having, right, the best green energy in the world here, right? Which again is happening in terms of things like wind energy, again, a real strength here in Texas. But other opportunities really left open, right, with photovoltaics and beyond, and the technology innovations that are required to think about energy more holistically. And so again, it gets down to the thing. I do think there's a head start there in understanding, but a risk here will be as we build energy of the future and the next generation of manufacturing, it may be tied less to certain feedstock and other limitations. So now at the end of the day, you want to be thinking about, do you have the best talent? Do you have policies that are welcoming, right? It's going to come down to these other factors if you could build manufacturing anywhere, right? So I think it's something we have to get ahead of as we think about this region.
And I would just add, Bill and Julia obviously are on the ground, have a better idea of Houston-specific problems. The thing that I would contribute to this on the energy side of things, at least, is the biggest challenge for Houston is going to be that every other place wants to be the center of energy 2.0. And the spots that it's not just the city, it's not just the university, but also the state willing to put significant sums of money in as well. That's going to be a challenge for Houston.
Great. That sort of leads us to what I think is probably our last question, and I'd like each of the panelists to perhaps briefly address this. So the development of the Innovation Hub requires the participation of a broad range of actors, including the public agencies, private entities such as funders, developers, private companies, as we've heard today. We all know Houston's developing an innovation district anchored by the ION. What role do you recommend the city take as it plans and implements policies around this development? What is the role of the city in all this?
Well, I'm gonna say something funny and say the role of the city, I think, is to facilitate the creation of these networks. If you look at, I used to be in San Diego, and if you look at Torrey Pines and you look at the way that system works, it really emerged out of cooperative organizations that were created long ago by a variety of players, right? And I think the other role, this is to Julia's point, I think the other role that the city can play because this is, again, the role I tried to play in San Diego, is how do you retain the manufacturing close to the innovation, right? And because it's very easy at a certain point for manufacturing to spin off to a different geography, right? And then you don't get the full benefit of all of the wage ranges and all of the industries you can get. Now Houston has a tremendously strong manufacturing economy, but that could go away. So I think two things are, number one, to make sure that those networks are there so that everybody's talking to each other, which hasn't been the case in Houston historically. And number two, to take a big picture understanding that it's not just going to get tech jobs, or it's not just going to run a bunch of cool startups in an accelerator, but it's creating a whole ecosystem that spins off all kinds of jobs, including manufacturing jobs, that you have to figure out how to make sure they can stay in the region so that people who live in the region can have good jobs.
So what I would say is, first, I don't get involved very much in city politics and policy. I have enough on my plate with state politics and policy. But I would say probably the best thing they could do, or one of the most helpful things, is to be open-minded and be open to change. And I say that because in each of the communities that I highlighted, I'm sure if you were to have asked them at the start of their transformation, whether they thought they could become a center of gravity in X, whatever they are, a center of gravity in, they would have said no. It was, they all were rooted in the past, as we are as humans. We know what we know, and but somehow they were able to accept the idea that there was a new future that could look different from the past, but they did not come to that easily. And so, had they not come to that realization, we may not have the innovation hubs that we have now.
I can add to that. I think certainly the manufacturing point, well taken. I fully agree with that, as well as everything else that has been said here. So I'll add another new one to the mix, which would be the focus on an intentional talent strategy from an educational perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you got to take a holistic look at everything. You think about attracting a diverse, technical-minded workforce. You're going to want education to retool workforces, right? As certain industries might be going down, people are just going to leave, right, Houston? You don't want that, right? You want to retain those technical skills here to do this, right? So you need to be able to retool workforces. You have to be able to think about STEM education, but you even have to think about, with these technical workers, is the education system and is the community set up to attract and keep this diverse workforce, including things like, is childcare easily available, right? Is STEM strong in the schools? Are the schools of sufficient quality? Do we have what we need in terms of housing and availability of everything there? These things are really important when people decide where they want to build their career. And again, if they, for example, are a technical person and the company either downsizes or otherwise, are they leaving the area or are they staying and bringing those skills forward for the needs of the future? So I think the city has a role to play, and the community does, in terms of thinking about intentionally pivoting to a technical-minded community and workforce.
So I would say the city definitely has a role to play, just as the university has a role to play. And I'm reminded of a story that the chairman of our board, who is Tom Ridge, the former governor of Pennsylvania, told me in talking with one of his congressional colleagues and getting frustrated with him. And he said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. You need to listen more and talk less. And I think it's good advice, not just for cities, but for universities as well, to listen and act with humility. I think there is a tendency for all of us to think we should take the lead on something. And oftentimes you're better sitting back and listening and reflecting about what your proper role might be. So that would be my advice for the city.
Great advice. There is one burning question that seemed to come in, and whoever is best suited to answer this can answer it. Who is our biggest foreign competitor, whether it's a city or a region or a country, in terms of capturing the energy future? Does anybody have any thought on that? It's a tough question.
I was going to defer to Julia on that.
Yeah, and I'm happy to take it, right? Because honestly, yeah, no, I can certainly jump into it. You see, it's like, so there's many answers to this. So I'll try to keep it a little bit brief too. You see big energy hubs and alternative energy developing in a few different places, right? The future of green energy can go many directions. You see, for example, Europe taking a real lead in the development of certain areas, for example, nuclear power, right? Real powerhouse there in terms of pushing technology forward if we go that way. You see the evolution of photovoltaic and solar technology really taking hold and growing like gangbusters as well. We sell a lot of materials into that, but a lot of growth happening in Asia Pacific, embracing solar technology, as well as, of course, right, Silicon Valley in terms of investing there, right? California with some also heavy investments made to further things like solar technology are really taking lead. So honestly, I see different regions in a way taking different bets in the green energy future. I'd say Texas right now is strong in wind, but that's a developed technology. There's innovation to be had. But if you ask me, do I have a region that's looking holistically at all different options? I think it's still an opportunity, right? You have regulations taking a lead, for example, in Europe, right? Where you're going to see some of these carbon rules come in first. So the pressure on green energy will be strong there, but the technology fueling that is coming from all over the world, right? And so I do think it's an opportunity, and we have to look in this region at the strength we have in engineering, the strength we have in chemistry, and trying to define more broadly the energy side.
All right. I'll go ahead and leave it there. I think we've answered just about all of the questions. We've had a great panelist. I want to thank Dr. Harden, Mr. Berglund, Bill Fulton, Dr. Wertig for joining us today and share your insights and experience in innovation development and policy. I'd also like to thank the audience for your attention and invite you to attend other virtual events being hosted by Rice University and the Baker Institute for Public Policy, such as the upcoming event from the Baker Institute Center for Health and Biosciences on December 10th at noon Central, where a panel including Baker Institute fellow Dr. Peter Hotez will discuss the evolution of vaccination policies and the COVID-19 pandemic. Meanwhile, I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy, and thank you again for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.